There we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week, we've got Wren Brier and Tim Dawson, creators behind a very popular game this season, Unpacking. If I can try and explain the game really quickly, it is a pixel art unpacking simulator, a very relaxing game where you open up boxes and see the objects of a person's life and sort them, put them in a room to your heart's content, organize things, and you sort of develop an attachment to this character through some emergent narrative and sort of learn things about the evolution of their life as you go along. And it is a wonderfully charming experience. And I thank you both for coming on the show. And please feel free to explain the game yourself if there's anything you think I've left out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I think that kind of captures the big parts of the game. Like, we've described it in lots of ways. It's like
It's a game about taking things out of boxes and finding places for them to go. And it's also about learning about the life of a character as you follow her through the moves in her life from childhood to adulthood, learning about her through the objects she obtains, what she keeps and what she leaves behind.
Yeah, I think a big part of the game that, like, any good description of it covers is the duality of it being a kind of puzzle game where you get to, like, put objects in places and it feels nice, and also being a narrative game. And, like, during development, these were the two big parts of it as well. So it's kind of, any description that, like, omits one over the other always, like, feels like it's lacking.
Right. I feel like there's this, it hit these two key parts of my brain. There's that one part of my brain that likes sorting and organizing and, like, fell in love with Wilmot's Warehouse and, like, putting everything in its right place and making those, like, personal decisions about where things go. But then also the, like, surprise and curiosity of, like, oh, what's the next thing I'm going to pull out of this box? What is the, where are we going next with this thing? And what am I going to have to leave room for, or what am I going to have to, like, reposition in order, because I think, these things belong on this shelf now rather than this. And it hits these two pieces of my brain and just bats it back and forth in such a really charming way. And I'm curious, like, I've heard a little bit about how you guys stumbled into the project, but can you tell us about how you guys came to finding the flow of the puzzle?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think, like, part of it, we've told the origin story of, like, when I moved into this apartment with Wren, moved my stuff in with Wren, and we're unpacking it, and that's where the kind of we were like, oh, Wren recognized there was, like, a bunch of game conventions that we were doing in the unpacking thing. It was like, oh, we could do something with this. But already there, I think there was like a lot of the seeds of recognizing that taking stuff out of boxes is inherently a narrative. There's, like, if you take out 3 cups and there's 4 cups, you're now waiting for that 4th cup to come out, kind of thing.
Right.
If you take out a bunch of items that kind of go together, you're anticipating, and it's like stuff that's stacked together as well feels like it belongs because it presumably went into the box in that order. So I think just mechanically, like, from the mechanical premise, there was a lot of potential for storytelling. And one example from early on in our prototype, when we did the kitchen level, we had the microwave, which I had packed in one of the lower boxes. And when it came out, it was this huge item that took up all the shelf space.
Right.
And it landed like a punchline, right, where people would be unpacking the kitchen and suddenly the microwave comes out and it's like, hey, those shelves you organized, now you've got a microwave to deal with. And I love that because it's like, I love the idea of using a pure mechanical system as a kind of, like, you can tell a joke with just an item order. That's kind of neat.
And then, like, it gives players agency to decide, like, well, what am I doing with this? Because they're actually not forced to reorganize their shelves, although that is kind of the expectation. They can also be like, screw this, I'm just putting it on the fridge. I don't care if my food falls on my face and I get burns. This is where that fridge is going, where that microwave is going. So it lets players make these choices that have kind of narrative consequences, but only in their head, really.
Right. It's interesting because it doesn't force the player to conform. I mean, certain things can't be on the floor or whatever, but like there's very, very few instances where it ever like forces you to conform to a way that things need to be unpacked. But I feel like a lot of those mechanical jokes rely on some sort of common conceptions about how things are organized, you know, or the way our culture tells the, you know, that we've put things away. And I'm curious how you guys walked those lines, because I mean that can be kind of different from person to person, you know, and how we interpret the way that things should be organized, and whether, you know, that punchline joke of the microwave is going to land with everybody if we don't all keep our microwave in the obvious spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of when we were designing the game as well was just recognizing that stuff, like some stuff would land, some stuff would really resonate, and some stuff wouldn't, and that would be okay. And like you were saying that, we were mentioning about how like there's very little forcing the player to do things, and so like the investigating and the, you know, discovering things is also like that. We let a lot of details fly over your head if you either don't get the reference or don't have that association or just aren't paying attention. And it's like, I think it's part of it is kind of making that peace with the fact that, like, because there's no laugh track, right? You're not going to be,
right.
Nothing's going to cue you in that like you were supposed to think that the microwave coming out then was this big disaster. It was just this common thing that often happened, and I would enjoy it when it would happen to people. But if it came out and they're like, that's fine, I left space for it on the top shelf, it's like, yeah, that's fine. Okay, it didn't land the way I expected, but it's okay because the game wasn't relying on that to happen.
Yeah, but I think there is a lot of like kind of guessing how players would react to things, and the thing is, because it's such a familiar environment, it's people have these kind of predictable responses in some ways. Like if it was a really alien environment, people might be harder to predict, and they would have a harder time like knowing what to do with things. But because it's something that we all deal with all the time, it's like anything that comes out, we have some kind of preconception about how that works. So even I think what I like is when I see people streaming the game and they take out the toaster and they're like, oh, I know what to do with the toaster, where I know where to put this, and they put it in the bath thinking they're really clever, and then they get the achievement for putting it in the bath, and they're like, oh my god, the game called me out, and they love it. So it's just kind of thinking about what will players respond to, and what do we think players are gonna try. Yeah,
and like there's a bunch of cultural stuff that like does come in, like, you know, some people wanting to put the shoes near the doorway, and that's where they need to go rather than in the closet. Like, people have different ideas about where things have gone, and for the most part we just try to lean into that by, like, if we noticed, like when we were showing the game early on, we did it at Day of the Devs and stuff, and we got to see people playing it live back in the before times when and for the most part, if we just recognize if someone was rubbing up against our rules and it was just because they came at it from a different angle, we tried to relax those rules, because it wasn't about enforcing our cultural norms on them. It was just about allowing a play space that felt authentic.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like playtesting very early on that went into how we decided on the rules of the game. So, I mean, so in relation to your previous question, like where you were asking how we got to the flow of the game, like for some reason it always seemed right to us that this is like a game without a timer, and we really early on decided, okay, there's not going to be like scoring, because that's really judgmental, and we don't want to make the player feel judged. We don't want to make the player feel rushed. This is about the player kind of getting to know these items and putting them away to their liking. So all of these kind of more typical mechanics don't work for us. But what we did kind of discover through playtesting was that once we added the validation system that tells you, oh no, this item can't go here, at first we made players angry, because they were like, why are you judging me? Why don't you want me to put this thing where I put it in real life? Like, I like to leave my pots and pans on the stovetop. That's just where I keep them. Are you telling me that I am incorrect in how I organize my home? And that's fair. That's a fair criticism, because like, just because we do something one way doesn't mean that that's the only way. So we kept like widening what we considered valid, to try to consider every possibility. And I still notice when I do when I'm watching streamers that in later levels I'm like, oh no, I should have allowed that. I missed this, because each item is like zoned individually. It's the whole thing. So I still notice that we've missed some, but for the most part, we've like tried to be very accommodating.
Yeah, the design rule that we kind of embraced was that any item that gets like a red outline around it and says it can't go here should either be you should agree with it. You should be like, yeah, that's fair. Like if you put an item in the middle of the floor and it gets a red outline, it's like, okay, yeah, I didn't put that away. Or if you put something that like just doesn't belong in the bathroom and it's got a red outline, it's like, yeah, no, I get you. Sometimes, and the player has to trust that, because as long as they do trust that, it means that when they see something they don't expect, like they put something in the bathroom and it gets a red outline, they need to go, oh, I misunderstood what that item is. Oh, it's something else that belongs in the bedroom or something, and they can move it rather than think that the game's just being overly picky or being weird or being a bug. We got people like emailing us about specific items and being like, there's a bug, the game won't let me put this in there.
Yeah,
like,
so that's the
look
thing.
Closer.
That's the thing. That's where we like the thing with players needing to develop a trust in us with the placement is like that also helps us tell our story beats, like the one with the diploma or the one where you hang up the ex's photo,
or the diary,
or the diary in the first level. Yeah,
and that's designed actually to catch people out, where they'll most likely put the diary somewhere out and then it'll get a red outline and it was great watching people like PAX Australia or something being like, there'd be like two dudes playing the game and they'd be like, dude, it won't let me put the book here, and then like it's like, dude, that's a diary, that needs to go away, and he's like, oh, okay, and like it's like, cool, lucky you got your friend there to
yeah.
I'm very curious then, so just looking at the game, I kind of get the sense that there's no, like, this isn't a procedural placement system that you know it feels very like brute force, for lack of a better term, or like hand picked, like, because you've had to make the sprites for every single, whether it's placing flat or on the side for each of these sections. And then you mentioned you had a grid or a zoning system. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that. And then, like, I understand the pain of like, okay, player, you can do anything you want, and then having to like actually back that up with like the amount of effort that goes into fulfilling all of those attempts. So what is the process of getting an individual item working in the game for you guys?
Well, I first just wanted to say I'm laughing because you nailed it. Like, this game is as handcrafted,
right?
As
yeah. I can't imagine it happening any other way.
Yeah. So what's the process of getting an item into the game? It's I guess a little hard to address it like that, because usually we did it in batches. Like we would make trying to think how to explain this. So we'd start with designing the room layout or the apartment layout even. And then and I would actually be designing the levels like right in my art program, and then taking them to Unity. And then in Unity, we would make placeholder items for everything. So the placeholders are just like these blocks, because all of the items are essentially designed to fit inside these cubes or rectangles, or not rectangles, blocks.
Yeah, they've got 3 dimensions, so they like most items are just like X by Y by Z or height.
Yeah, height, width, depth. So we'd basically come up with all these items, and we would come up with like spreadsheets first to like make sure that we like all these items, that they all make sense to us, and then we'd start making these placeholders to put into the game to see how they fill up the room. And if we're like, yeah, this seems like the right amount of items, and it portrays all the things we want about the character, then we take all those placeholders and like recreate them in the art program, like make actual art for them that fits inside those boxes. Then we take the art back, we export the art into the into Unity again, and put it into the placeholder items. And the placeholder items all have like a lot of things, a lot of properties defined. So like, Tim, I'll let you talk about the properties.
Yeah. Well, I was going to get into the big part of it is the tool pipeline, right? Early on, I like pretty much from my kind of prototype level, I recognized that this was going to be a data-driven game with a lot of things to keep track of, and we would easily drown if we were trying to like set up prefabs manually, or like manage all this stuff in our heads and trying to kind of cross-reference stuff. So I tried to build tools. My philosophy for building tools is you build tools wherever you can. Anytime you're trying to do like a task twice, you go like, okay, like you should probably have a tool that does it for me, kind of thing. Anytime you recognize something you're doing like manually, like, oh, I'm dragging every one of these into every one of these fields. It's like, I could do this in a button, and then the button could do it like 100 times or 1,000 times, and that would be great. I like to make tools that are kind of simple at first and then just kind of grow as needed. Like sometimes people get into the thing of they over-engineer their tools, or they make like these really complicated tools that don't end up being fit for purpose. So I like to make, like, I feel like a simple tool, like a batch script, gets you 70% of the way there. And then you add some extra stuff on it and you get it to 80%, and somewhere you get to 90%. And then you can decide, is it going to save me to keep pushing, or is this actually good enough? We're only going to use it 3 times. And so with the tools in Unpacking, we had an item creation tool that would, for creating the item, so each item was a prefab, but we generally didn't interact with those prefabs. We would use the item creation tool that would let us search items, it would preview them, it would show them both in the game screen, but also in its own little box, which was really useful because it meant you could just flip through the items. You could resize and dynamically change their placeholder size. And so when Wren was like adding items to a level, she could actually create a new item, give it a name, give it a size, and go bloop, and it would be able to be added to the game in runtime because we were writing it to the disk and then refreshing the scene. And this is all about trying to reduce that friction. Where like there's so much work in the game, like so much work making every pixel thing, that like anything you can save, anything you can automate is worth doing, because we're going to be doing it so many times. And then it meant that when the art got added to it, the item was already in the game. The item could come out of the box. It just looked like a grid box, right? Like it just had its name written on it.
Right.
But the art would go in, and so you'd import the art, and suddenly the item is working. You don't change the level; it just has art now. And that was so we could have these layers and waves of content building.
And the items would each have like zones defined that they could go on, and that was tied to the zoning system that Tim wrote, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. But it's like the rooms are just like full of these grids that we defined, and the grids have different titles assigned to them essentially. So you've got like in say the kids' bedroom in the first level, you've got the floor, you've got the desk, the bed, the cabinet, the shelves, that sort of thing. There's also, with the floor, there's like floor spaces that are valid and floor spaces that are just like, you can leave stuff here, but not like permanently.
Yeah, we've got floor and then we've got none. So a lot of the floor is actually none, where we're going like nothing's allowed there. Floor tends to be stuff like where a bin can go or a backpack. So it's or some shoes. And the key part of this was that in the tool we had in Unity, everything was visualized. So you saw the grid and it was color coded, and you'd switch between the different modes, and you could visually see if something was marked as a shelf or a bed or something like that. And it was
and the different zones you could also like so for the grids, you could set zoning for them. You can set like height, which is how tall the item inside them could be. So like if you had some shelves, is like, are these shelves like, do they have room for an item that's 3 tall or an item that's 4 tall? And they had, of course, like their actual like height in the world, like their
yeah, that originally when I was building the system, obviously they have an X and Y position because the whole game is built in 2D as well. Like, sorry, the whole game is obviously we use depth for sprite sorting, but the game is drawn as a 2D graphic, and then we're just using the depth to do the sorting. We're not trying. Some people were wondering like, oh, is the game actually secretly 3D? But like, no, it's actually like. It uses depth, but everything looks pretty weird if you looked at
yeah.
if that makes sense. But so originally there was this concept of height where like, because when I was trying to think about how the grids would work, you can pivot them backwards a little bit so that a flat grid is further back if it's at the top of the screen, and further forward if it's at the bottom of the screen. That's your traditional isometric item sorting. But to do height, you need to push certain grids forwards or backwards. And originally, I hoped that this would just be like this kind of constant factor, where if you could say like, if this position is considered like 10 centimeters above the ground, then we can push it forward by this much, and everything will just work. That didn't turn out to be the case. Instead, it's like a fudge factor where you're just like pushing things in and out in order to make everything work. But that was And the point of the grid tool was that everything is very interactive. You get to see what it looks like in the viewport. You get to build the environment as you're doing it. And it's really easy. If you need to nudge the shelf over like 3 pixels, you just go click, click. You can select the entire shelf and go click, 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 and it's done. Which again was part of the whole tool simplifying things that could otherwise be really complicated and prevent us from iterating.
Yeah. And I was just going to say the grids, like one of their other things that you can define for them is audio. So you define what the surface, what kind of audio that surface has. So like, is this made of metal? Is this made of wood? Is this made of ceramic? And then the items, whatever properties they have, and they interact with that surface. So that's all defined through the grid system as well.
We uncoupled that from the zone types as well. Like we didn't say that shelf always sounds like a shelf, just so that Jeff had maximum control when he was tuning the audio. So like you can have a metal shelf versus a wooden shelf. Yeah.
Right. That's a lot of depth in the zoning system. But I mean, it shows. The work does show. It's definitely there.
And then.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Oh, I was gonna say and then with the in the item creation tool, like we define what zones the item can go on, and there's so many. It's like because it's you define it per room type. So you're like, okay, so in bedroom, this can go on a shelf and in the drawer, and in the living room, it can go in, say, like on the coffee table and on the shelf there, which is a different zone to shelf in bedroom, and on the side table. And you do that for each and every zone, and there's like, how many did we have? Like 7? There's a lot of permutation. Yeah, there's like 7 types of rooms, and each room has between like, I don't know, 5 and like 15 zones or something. So each item has to have that manually defined. We had a bunch of tools to help do it in batch, though. Tim and I like worked on tools. It's like I would tell Tim they need this, and Tim's like, oh god, and then would do it. Thanks, Tim.
It's actually interesting to hear you say that, because my question was largely going to be about, like, I've talked with other devs about commenting your code properly when you're working in a team, but like building tools, do you find that's like a really good way of minimizing friction between team members and like making the production functional across the whole team? And at what stage do you start developing your tools for a project? Yeah, so like I think like the way I see that is I feel guilt if other people on the team are doing work they don't have to do, or having to like dick around with manually setting up values, and especially if it's even worse for me if it doesn't bother them. Like, that's okay, I'll just manually rename these 10 files, and like, you shouldn't need to. That's a failure on my part. Like, I'm supposed to be facilitating like the creative
construction of the game and all this stuff to happen. So like, yeah, wherever possible, like sometimes I'd spot like, because as well as Wren, we had Angus, who was an artist that worked with us for most of the project. And sometimes I'd see him doing something and be like, no, that's too manual. You shouldn't have to do that ever again. I'll get on that. And it's like, I was really, so not only did like, when people suggested things, they said, oh, I want to be able to do this, like coming from Wren or Angus or someone else, or Jeff. Jeff had a lot of, Jeff who did the sound design and music and stuff, had a lot of suggestions. And Jeff's great because sometimes he asks for things like his background. He's worked on these huge, big projects with massive resources. So sometimes he'll just kind of ask for things kind of innocently without realizing what a pain in the butt it is. But it's like, he always has a good reason for it. So it's like, like, yeah, okay, we should figure out how to do that. And you get a better result for it. Like I learned to, anytime Jeff asks for something weird, like, oh, I need to be able to specify the reverb, but be able to customize it per room. I'm like, sure thing, Jeff, you know what you're doing. Right. I'm going to give you that because it's what I wish people had given me as an animator working at studios. And I'm not going to be the guy that denies you some cool little touch because I can't understand it personally.
Although I am going to say that, like, with Tim being our only programmer for the vast majority of the project, there was a bit of a bottleneck where, like, Tim would prioritize tools where he could, but he also had a lot of other things to do on the project. So, for example, we had an export system that involved, like, bat files, like just running a bat file on our A-Sprite files to export the layers. And it was really, really basic for quite a long time. Like all it did was like any layers that, all it did was export all the layers twice, once cropped and once not cropped. And then I'd use like cues from the layer names that I'd decided on, like start with underscore, you delete that, and start with caret, that goes in this other folder. So I'd use that to manually sort them into folders. And I was like, hey, Tim, we need to automate this at some point. And Tim's like, yeah, I have a lot to do. And eventually we got to it, and it, all of that was done automatically. And like now our bat files are like way more extensive and really help with the process. But for, I think, like half a year to a year, we were doing it manually.
Right, I can really feel like when you're going very tool heavy with your production, it can be like we've been in development for so long, and it really doesn't feel like we're moving anywhere. But then like that last quarter is like super quick come together. Was that what it was like for you guys? Or did you see the general progress along the way, or was it all at once at the end?
Yeah, there were definitely points in the project where it felt like we were kind of not moving ahead as fast as we'd like to, or kind of like circling a little bit. But and this is something I've seen on other projects, and something I was really trying to avoid, was when you get to the end of the project, it can either be like we need to add a new weapon or something like that, and it's the worst thing in the world, like everyone groans, and it's like it's going to take 2 months to do this. Or it could be like, I'm done, do you need anything else? And that's kind of the two ways it can go, because you're either, like you're saying, you're either trending towards that efficiency where you can go like, wow, we could make the whole game in 2 months now, or you're trending towards that complexity overload where everything is like, everything is balanced on everything else, and if you move anything, it's going to collapse. And I was very in favor of trying to build tools in a way that would meant that the end of the game where we're going to be really exhausted, and ideally making the most important creative decisions to like make the game go from like good to great. I don't want there to be any friction, or to be minimal friction. I wanted, if you decide that something we need to put these items from one level to another level, I wanted that to be no big deal. I wanted to just be able to click on some things and be done. Yeah. And so one really interesting example, so like drawers in the game, like you click on them and they slide out, and you can put items in them. Technical nightmare, if you think about it for a moment. It's isometric. Especially when you appreciate that the drawer can open up and include items that are underneath the drawer, but also have to detect if the drawer is too low and actually bangs into the item and then can't open. There's a bunch of things that are going on there, but it's very complicated.
A lot of masks.
Manually setting up the drawers to work is like about, this like 20-step process of like you have to set up like define all these things. And I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to do that. So I've built like I've got a little script on the inspector inside Unity that is like it's got fixed drawers, and it does basically anything you can think of to set up anything that's a no-brainer. It sets up the grid. It calculates that it's correctly distanced from its previous drawer. It checks its drawer manager to make sure it's registered with it and hasn't been like unlinked or something like that. It does all the manual things. And as a result, like when I was adding drawers to a later level and I'd come back to this, I'd forgotten the steps. Like I could have documented it and written out like the 10 steps required of the drawers. But I had this like, I basically kind of dragged a drawer object in and said, I think that's about right, and hit fix drawers. And it did most of it. And then I just had to tweak a couple of things to make it feel right. And it's like, to me, like tools are almost like living documentation where the tool remembers how something works. So I don't have to. So I can just free my mind of that specific like thing, and the code is much better at remembering the specific steps I have to do than I am.
And from my perspective as someone who only uses the tools, so one thing that we added into the game really late but I had planned to do for literal years was add like weathering to some of the objects. So the most notable example is the pig, who has like 5 different weathering states. He starts off with his little bow and like very shiny and new, and then he loses his bow, and then he gets a rip, and then the rip gets patched, and then he eventually gets like a new shiny new gold bow. And that was something we added literally in the last couple months of development, but had planned for ages. And doing weathering for like all of the items that have weathering in the game, from making the art to getting them into the game, took like maybe 2 days. But it was like waiting for years. And just replacing, like just adding variants to the items, and then like replacing what we had in the game, like the original pig without the weathering in the specific levels and all this, was just super fast with the tools we had.
It's really interesting to hear that it does, some of the parts do come together so quickly at the end, but like, how do you maintain faith in, like, you obviously think you got something, but like, how did you guys personally maintain faith in the concept, especially when you're trying something super new? I want to say almost genre inventing, that's never been done. You don't really have any examples to be like, oh yeah, it's going to be like this, but different a little bit. How do you guys hold faith, especially when you're so deep in tools and making sure that it's all going to be able to come together? You have to have this clear vision for the thing at the end. How did you manage psychologically?
Sure. I've got an answer too, but
okay, yeah. Well, I would say that we had a lot of outside feedback. I mean, first we did think that our idea was good and interesting, and I think honestly, like, part of the original idea comes from the fact that my background is in mobile, and in mobile games you have a lot of kind of games that are based on like one weird mechanic, and that's like the whole game. And usually they don't go to like the depths that we did with Unpacking, but it was like that. I think that's kind of where that came from. And I like Animal Crossing. I like The Sims. I like a lot of games that do let you do self-expression, let you kind of customize things. And I also really liked Gone Home, which does like really amazing environmental storytelling. And another influence was Florence, which tells like a story with very few words, and it's like very touching. So you can see all these influences in the game, and all of these are games that have done well, and you can look at these and be like, look, we're doing kind of this and this and this. But obviously Unpacking is also not like any of them. It's something different. And so, yeah, we had this idea that we thought was interesting and did cool things, and relied on some existing things, but did a lot of new stuff. And we didn't know what level of success it would have, or like that it would appeal to people this much. So this is more that we developed the project very openly, very like public facing to some degree. Like, so we first made a prototype to be able to submit the game to Stugan, which is this game accelerator program in Sweden. And we got in and went to Stugan and had like reactions from visitors who were like industry professionals, but also just random friends of the teams. And we could see that people were into this, and it was getting like a really interesting reaction. And then when we went back to Australia, we posted our first GIF on our Twitter, and that went viral. Like, people were responding to this. So we were like, okay, we have something here. It wasn't like we went with this weird idea and just went like, we are gambling on this thing. We have no idea if people will like it. We were constantly getting feedback that this is something interesting. But also a kind of interesting part of this is the story. We didn't get to prove out the story for a really long time. Mm-hmm. So when the game went viral, we started being approached by publishers, which was like another kind of boost in confidence in the project. And that's how we ended up signing as well. But while we were pitching it, one of the things that was like kind of chafing against potential investors and publishers, they were like, I don't really have faith that you can pull off this story aspect. Like, our prototype didn't show it because it required having multiple levels to show this story. So when we had in our initial prototype, we had just a kitchen. It wasn't even a full, it wasn't even the kids' room, which like ties into the story. It was just a kitchen. And so people would be like, look, this story idea is cool and all, but I don't know if you can pull it off. And honestly, we were like, fair. Like, we didn't know if we could pull it off. We had our ideas for how to do it, but it wasn't until so that was the game going viral was like August 2018, and it wasn't until like October 2019 that we had a demo with the first 2 levels of the game that people could play and see chronological progression of the character. And the response to that was just like really heartening, that people were already seeing story in the very few kind of items that came along with this character. They were really resonating with this. So we were like, okay, the story is working. It was scary. And a lot of parts of working on this game, like each part, we felt like we were proving it out as we went along. And once we knew the story was working, we were like a lot more confident. But even then, we were like, oh, can we pull off this entire story? Can we pull off a game with this many levels that's just about unpacking? Can we pull off our story beats? And just every so often, we'd get that sort of confirmation from like playtesters or shows.
Right.
I was going to say that I think like one of the things that what I relied on was actually having a lot of doubt. Like I'm always questioning what I'm doing, if it's a good idea. I think it's very healthy. I think it's dangerous if you truly believe in your game idea as like it's being perfect. Like, obviously I know there's this potential to it. I wouldn't be working on something if I didn't think it could be great. But I'm also constantly thinking like, what if my version of it is bad? What if the execution is just flawed? And so I'm constantly looking for gates where you set some sort of like line in the sand where you say, when you can move items around a kitchen, it should feel satisfying. Clicking things into position should feel satisfying. There's no story, there's no mechanics, there's no boxes yet. It's just like, just be able to move the items around. In my mind, I can imagine it feeling satisfying. And so we build this, like the earliest prototype before Stugan, before anything like that, just moving some items around the kitchen. Oh, it does feel satisfying to snap them into place. It looks nice. It's Wren's pixel art looks really nice, kind of working this way. And every part of the game was a little bit like that. Like every new obstacle was like, okay, items can come out of boxes. There's something to, okay, it feels the way I wanted it to feel in my head. And when you can predict something and then meet your predictions, that's always a good sign. It means it feels like maybe you can trust your next prediction. Right. And if it doesn't meet your prediction, then that's a really good time to think about the path, backtrack, and change something. Like you should. I've worked on projects where I feel like people have done their first playable and the first playable sucks, and they're like, don't worry, we'll make it good by alpha or something, and you're like,
oh yes, I've been on those too.
why like no, like your plan, you drew a map and you followed the map and you ended up in the wrong spot. What are you doing? Like,
Right.
you can't just continue going and hope for the best. Like, you have to reassess. But luckily with Unpacking, like we did hit a lot of those metrics. Like Wren was saying, we had, and like I would always be quite negative. I like, obviously I was like believing in the game, but like there's always that fear. We made it a kitchen level, and people really like the kitchen level. And it's like, what if people just like kitchens? What if that's a secret sauce that we found?
Right.
And it's weird. We've got this whole game planned, but they just like kitchens, and we're going to give them something other than the kitchen. They're going to walk away. So we gave them the kids' room. Like, that was the next level we developed, and people still like the kids' room. Okay, cool. But the whole game is depending on this like storyline progression. What if the next level it's going to have like 3 rooms that you can switch between? What if people hate that? What if people just love single rooms? And then so we showed that, and they loved that even more. And so everything was meeting our projections and not hitting my fear points. And that's what gave me confidence going forward.
Right.
So yeah,
it's like being an archaeologist, and you're pretty sure there's a dinosaur underneath here, and you'll dust off this bit, and yeah, okay, there's the tailbone, and there might be, you know, the leg over here, so we'll go for that next. But you just got to keep going at it piece by piece by piece, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm very curious how you manage. Like, I get a lot of anxiety showing off my stuff, you know, especially in early stage. But I'm also hyper aware of like how critical it is to get feedback and adapt. And how did you manage? Because I guess 2019 was the demo on Steam Fest, if I'm not mistaken.
Steam Fest was Steam Fest was this year.
Steam Fest was this year? Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies.
So we had a demo quite a few times, the 2-level demo, quite a few times on a few places. So
right.
The first time we showed it was PAX 2019.
Right. So yeah, that's, I mean, well, 3 years isn't all that much, but it's still, it can be a bit of a dicey sort of situation between balancing how much do you want to show the public versus, you know, I want to keep making this better before I do. And how do you guys personally manage that walking that line?
So something I just want to aside before getting, like the so my previous game, I saw Android Cactus. I felt one of the things that made it harder to kind of get that kind of launch hype and release kind of stuff was because we were in early access. The game was constantly on show all the time, and it really made kind of figuring out marketing beats. This is something I hadn't really thought about. It seems really obvious in hindsight, but coming up to it, like we're working with a PR agency because that was all self-published, but we're working with a PR company to get outreach to press, and they were like, we need angles to feed them here because we can't. Anyone who wants to can just jump onto the Steam and buy your early access and play it right now. No journalists want to write about content that everybody has. And I was like, oh no, we needed to keep stuff back. And like in the end, we had the final cut scenes and some other extra stuff that we only gave to journalists ahead of its release. But it was very much a.
So when we were like quite early in Unpacking's development and like starting to build pitch decks for publishers and stuff, I have like a mentor kind of friend here who gave me a bunch of advice on doing pitch decks, but then she also gave me advice on just kind of in general about marketing and stuff. And one of the important things that really stuck with me was she said, like, withhold a lot of content, like make sure that you are very, very careful about what you show. And so a bit because, yeah, like Tim said, like journalists will want an angle, they'll want something new. And the public, like if they just already know everything about the game, like why would they even buy it when it finally comes out? So we had to kind of drip feed our content like only up to a certain point. Like we only showed the first 2 levels and things from the first 2 levels for like years. It wasn't until like June this year that we started showing things from the 3rd level, and then finally with the release trailer we showed like 1 room in the 4th level. But we kept most of the game secret. even though we were doing this kind of open development where we were showing stuff all the time and kind of keeping the public's interest. Yeah, but in terms of like being kind of nervous about showing stuff, I think I don't know if this is this kind of just makes sense to me that like Tim and I are both artists, and I think as artists, like when you're learning to be a better artist, you just kind of learn that you need to get a lot of feedback as you work. And I used to be really precious about it. I used to draw with like this with my arm like in front of my picture so people wouldn't be able to see when I was a kid. And slowly I had like art teachers like just convince me out of that habit and get me more and more used to like having people look at my unfinished art and give me feedback. And it's really painful, and I hated it for a really long time, but it gets easier and easier. And I think being open to that kind of feedback, no matter what state your project is really helpful.
One of the best lessons I learned as an animator was getting over myself and showing a rough block to my lead or someone kind of above me in the hierarchy, and having to be like, if they're good at their job, they'll recognize where it's at and not criticize me for like not being finished. Like, it's funny, right? Because there's stuff I'll show to a animation lead that I wouldn't show to, say, a producer, because you worry that a producer's going to go and like, that's not finished, that's not AAA or something like that. Yeah. But if you trust your lead, if you trust your boss, they should look at it and understand exactly what it is, and they're looking at the bones and go like, this is the right direction or it's the wrong direction. Either way, you've saved some time, right? Like, and that it's like jumping into water. You just have to kind of like brace for the shock and take it.
Yeah, and I think there's also like an aspect of with giving players, just like the public, the option to play your game when it's not done, is kind of figuring out what they're actually reacting to, and taking the feedback, like analyzing the feedback before you take it on. So like if what was it from, I think it was from Nart, you said that Nart says that players are always right about how they feel, but they're usually wrong about why.
Right, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And so like player gives you some feedback on a thing and says, oh, you should change this in this way, and it's like, probably not, but they are right that there's friction here, and you got to look at it and see what they're actually reacting to. And especially if it's an unfinished level and you're like, are they just reacting to the fact that like the character's not like animating properly here, or is there something actually about how the character moves in gameplay that's a problem?
And early on, it's so much more useful to show like to one or two people and just see what they think. Like, because it's like if you've messed up, if you made an interaction bad, you don't need 50 people in a row struggling with that interaction. That just feels like someone just beating you up.
It's interesting because the first couple levels, because we had them as a demo and showed it so many times, those levels got so much playtesting. Like I think on Steam Next Fest in particular, like there were like thousands and thousands and thousands of players. So we got it was like very thoroughly tested. But the later levels, I was really nervous for the longest time because I was like, how are we going to get people to test the whole game? And definitely it's not going to get tested to this quality. And then another friend told me, like, look, this is why you're testing the early levels, to get like a feel of how to design these levels, but you don't need to have them actually, like the later levels actually tested. Like you now have built kind of your understanding of what works and what doesn't, and you build these later levels based on that. And that made me feel a lot better. Right. And really helped. And we did play test the later levels, but I think we had maybe a dozen people play those later levels, and that's it. And that was enough, and people are really into them, so I think it worked out okay.
Well, I mean, it definitely worked out. All indicators say yes. But jumping back to the art conversation real quick, there's so first off, the pixel art is fantastic, and there's a lot of different ways you can approach doing pixel stuff. But the thing that I was mostly interested in with this project is, how did you decide the scale? because that's something that's like super critical, and you have to do like really early on. Because there's a lot of different ways, and especially when you've got so much that needs to be interpreted. How did you choose what scale to go with?
I'm laughing because I chose it like a dumbass, like in retrospect. So my thinking was I wanted these items to be able to portray like a certain level of detail. I wanted, say, like if you had a mug, that the mug could have like a pattern on it or like a logo on it. Because with pixel art, you can go so small that the mug just has a color and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, that's not enough. I want a bit more than that. And so I literally, I made a mug and I was like, how small can I make this mug and still have that level of detail on it? And I just made this mug and then I made it smaller and then I made it smaller and I was like, all right, that's good. And then I was like, how big is a mug? Okay, it's like 10 centimeters ish. And then I literally built the scale of the entire level around that. And it, for the most part, worked out, but also has caused us some headaches. Like it worked out that like we have, so all of the rooms are actually pretty small rooms. Everything is really compact. In real life, if all your apartments were like that, you'd be like, this is really cramped.
Or I'm in New York.
Or I'm in New York, or I'm in Tokyo or whatever. I mean, no, it's better than Tokyo, but maybe New York, It's like apartments in general are a bit bigger. Rooms in general are bigger than what we have in our game. So that's one thing. Cheapified, yeah. So it's like, it ended up being part of the style of the game that the rooms are kind of cramped. But that was so that they fit on the screen without needing to scroll sideways.
Right.
That was something that was important to us. And you still had to scroll up and down, but we were like, yeah, that's fine. But then we've got, what we didn't account for is 720 resolution.
Which you absolutely want to support for a Switch
Yeah.
version.
So, Tim, do you want to talk about this? Because that was your headache. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, here's a pro tip for anyone considering a pixel game that may potentially end up on Switch at some point. Okay. Don't make your game at 540p like true res and double pixels to 1080. Make it at 360p,
right.
Triple res it to 1080 and double res it to 720. You're done. You can go home now. Instead of me having to create a dynamically resizing, like the photo album in the game can handle looking good at 720 and 1080 dynamically. It's terrifying.
Even while animating, like it would be if it was like, well, yeah, but it's it's all 9 patches and shit like that. Sorry, swearing. It's all 9 patches. It's like easy. But it's like, no, it also needs to animate. So like each animation frame is 9 patched in like a really weird way.
We've got like turning pages where you can see the procedural screenshot at a glancing angle and stuff like that. And it's like if you've got it on Switch, like have an album screen, dock it and undock it, and see how the album adapts. It's like way more work than it needed to be.
Yeah.
But at that point, we were kind of committed, so we just kind of push through.
I think this is one of those things that a lot of people who start doing pixel art games, or I see a lot of games on Steam that don't really commit to exactness. You get that weird game maker scaling where suddenly things at different resolutions are 2 pixels wide instead of 1, and do you have any like any additional advice for people trying to retain the crispness of the pixel art across multiple resolutions?
I mean, I think the main thing is like UI is scary. Text is terrible because like you kind of have to commit to, like we ran into a lot of limitations.
Our text system is a nightmare.
Yeah, like we've effectively got 2 fonts, like 2 sizes of font, which takes a lot of options off the table. If we wanted to, technically, I mean, literally 3, but there's an asterisk. But it takes a lot of options off the table for when you're trying to, like, if you want something to be a bit bigger, you can't because you have 2 fonts. It's either the big one or the small one. And alternatively, you can just go, that's fine, everything will be scaled. I'll have like 3 pixel scales simultaneously, which, like you say, like a lot of games have that where and it drives me nuts. I find it unappealing. I know Wren does as well.
Yeah, I really don't like it. I think you should commit to your pixel resolution that you're doing, even if it means that you'll be doing more work. I think the final result is worth it. And maybe that's me being a weird purist and do whatever you want. Really, it's your game. But I like the resolution being consistent. I think it just looks and feels better. With our text system, is I just want to elaborate a bit more on that, because the reason that we only have the 3 font sizes is because all the text is just essentially sprite atlases of the text. It's all like images of the letters. It's not like a dynamic font system. And so what that meant was that and the reason for that is because our game is is pixel art, but it's at a high enough resolution that people don't make pixel art fonts at that size. It's just too big. Mm-hmm. So I had to take regular fonts and then make them look nice in pixel art, because when you just go, oh, well, we'll just not have aliasing and it'll be fine, they end up like really ugly and artifacty. Like they're just full of little dots and weird unevenness. So what we did was we rendered them out to sprite atlases, and then I manually, painstakingly cleaned every single letter in all the languages that we have in the game. Like, okay, and to be fair, for the worst of them, which was Chinese traditional and simplified, that was actually, we hired someone to do something like 40 or 50 hours of work just cleaning up our fonts. Someone who actually speaks Chinese and can like read the letters better. And yeah, for Japanese and Chinese, it was really difficult because you have so many characters, and it also meant that I'm probably going into a little too much detail here, so I'll stop soon. But like you don't. We weren't going to just clean up like all 10,000 kanji in existence or whatever. We only cleaned the ones that were in our game, mm-hmm. So that appeared in the game. So we relied on knowing what our strings are already to know which letters we had to clean up. And it was a lot.
It's kind of funny to hear all that, and I hate to break your heart, but I can't remember a single line of text in the game. All the narrative came to me so emergently that I never really thought about the text.
But I think the only reason that we could really do that with Chinese and Japanese was because we had so little text, because otherwise we would have had to clean way more. So yeah, it's like, the text in the album, the text in the menus, just that kind of text mainly.
Yeah, there's not a lot. I mean, it's surprising. There's more text than you think, because like a lot of it is menu and then a lot of it is album. But,
and the credits, the credit sequence. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main thing is like, it's if you're thinking about doing a pixel art game, like, and being, you're either going to be really purist about this and be like no like. So one of the decisions we made is, depending on the resolution, it will crop the game differently, and that's like that has got a lot of pros and cons, because it means that if you play it at a slightly higher resolution than you expect, it might go to 3 times pixels and actually look more zoomed in than on a 1080 screen. So now you're getting a little bit of a cramped feeling playing the game, but the pixels, we don't have any pixel straddling, so it's like that's our trade-off.
Yeah, that gets a lot more complicated when you're dealing with different genres too. Like, it's probably fine where in Unpacking, where there's no pressure, or you're not like a side scroller with you've got to have precision jumps and everything constantly dealing with. Are there other? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I would just say, like, in regards to that, because I don't want to like get in trouble with anyone, because I think you should do whatever works best for your game. And my rules are for Unpacking and for the kind of games I make, and I will break them as much as needed if the game requires. But I guess the main thing is that I think a lot of people look at pixel art and go like, oh, that's easy, so I'll do that, and kind of don't think about all the things that are really important to making pixel art look good and feel good.
Right. If you had to summarize what makes good pixel art into like a little mantra, what can we give the audience to walk away with?
Oh God, I don't know. Attention to detail.
Yeah, I
Really?
mean, as evidenced, yes, I would say that's
Yeah.
definitely on display in Unpacking.
I think like I want to say like I think one of the things I think is really strong about the art is the uh, overall like sorry not overall consistent aesthetic. The fact that everything in Unpacking looks like it belongs in the same game, and that's not easy, and it required a lot of especially because Wren collaborated like had at one point 3 other artists working with her, and they all had to kind of match that style, and it didn't just happen by accident. It was extremely intensive. I think Wren learnt more about her style trying to like direct other people than she had making art on her own.
For sure, yeah. It's consistency is really important, and if you're working with a team, you got to be really communicative. You got to be really aware of what makes your style. You got to kind of. The interesting thing was like I made the first room in Unpacking all by myself, and then the second room, which was like the kids' room, there was like half me, half Angus. And then from there on, I actually didn't do very much final art on the game. Like I did the first pass on every single level, but that was more like doing gray boxing than anything. But doing that first level gave me the opportunity to define how we do things. So I could be like, okay, rounded metal for a pot looks like this, and glass looks like this, and it looks like that if it's a big object, and like that if it's a small object. And if we have like really tiny items, we make them a little bigger and we make them chunky, and this is our minimum width for an item, and so on. Like it really helped with defining the style, kind of defining the technical bits, and just kind of figuring out how we work. And then once we brought Angus on the project, I could be like, okay, so this is like, just reference this to see how glass is done. And if he doesn't get it quite right, I can be like, because we do a lot of feedback sessions, I'd be like, all right, so this looks good, except the rim is wrong because it's not like this color or whatever. So yeah, there was a lot of work going into the consistency of the art between all the different artists.
Consistency and attention to detail. Good. We're coming near to the end of our time. But I did want to ask that I've heard you guys talk about the game in other interviews and such. And you mentioned that the project was a bit of a hobby project to start with, and I've talked with other devs about their back burner projects that eventually turn into their full mainstays. And I'm curious, what was the like tipping point for you guys? When did you guys really know and decide that this was going to be the thing that you guys wanted to focus on for years to come?
I think we definitely like there was 2 tipping points that were quite close together, so they kind of worked as one. We got back to Australia from Sweden, and we posted the GIF. We were just like, hey, here's a GIF of the thing, and it went berserk, and got reposted everywhere and lots of retweets and stuff. And then we got asked, still jet lagged, to apply for some local government. It's the local screen agency funding. Mm-hmm. They were like, oh, we've got these, but the deadline is like in 10 days or something like that.
Yeah, and so I worked a week full time just putting together this application, and we decided that it should be a Witchbeam project because, Tim is Witchbeam, but I'm not.
Yeah, I was going to say like we applied as a studio, getting that grant, like having you've got the grant thing really solidified it. Like that was 2 beats together that we had this lots of people were interested online, and a local agency was willing to give us a funding that would help us get going. And I was like, okay, now we have to kind of pull the trigger on it. Now we have to be very serious about the whole thing. Like this is Up until then, I think there was that chance that it could have just turned back into a back burner project, and we chipped away at it when we had time.
Yeah.
No, kudos. Those applications are not fun. We have similar here in Canada. They're not easy to pull together, especially in a 10-day span. But congratulations for that, and congratulations for all the success on the game. It really is probably one of the best things I played this year. Really well done.
Thank you so much.
No problem. As we're leaving here, is there anything you guys want to impart on people? Tell them to look at things. Where should they keep their eyes? Whether on your games or other amazing things around the internet.
Well, you can find Unpacking at unpackinggame.com or on Steam. You can just search for Unpacking. You'll find us. Even just Google Unpacking Game. You'll find us. You can also get it on Switch and on Xbox, where it's also available on Game Pass. We have Twitter and TikTok. It's pretty easy to find us.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get back to playing with more ideas and explore. I want to get back to 3D. That's
You've done some amazing 3D work. I would not be sad if you did go back to 3D.
Yeah, so our personal accounts, Tim, your Twitter, where you post your cool prototypes.
Yeah, I've got a Twitter handle, ironic account, but yeah, I'm easy to find. But yeah, like I'm hoping to.
Mine is Renegade, or like Renegade with a W at the start and then a Y at the end. Yeah, I will also post things if I make them. Right. We'll see.
Well, we look forward to it, and congratulations again, guys. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. Goodbye, audience, for now. I don't know where you're going after this, but we'll see you later.